let's come up with a story.
Netflix giveth and Netflix taketh away. I've been very critical on this channel of Netflix and their lack of quality content. To me, Netflix has always been about quantity over quality. A lot of the time, it seems like they just throw shit at the wall to see what sticks. There's been a few things like The Haunting of Hill House, Stranger Things, Ozark, that have defied my expectations. After watching The Haunting of Hill House and how impressed I was with it, I was genuinely excited to dive into The Haunting of Bly Manor. When you're watching an anthology series, you have to expect there's going to be differences between the individual series. Now, those differences could be substantial, and they could be minimal. I think for Mike Flanagan, and I enjoy Mike Flanagan's work quite a bit, I think he tried very hard to differentiate Bly Manor from Hill House. And honestly, he was successful in doing just that. But I have to be honest, I think he tried a little too hard, and I think he overthought the direction of Bly Manor. There's one less episode in Bly Manor than there was in Hill House, which is interesting to me because based on the story being told, Bly Manor just felt like a lot of filler to me. It was like he had a solid idea for the house and the history behind it, but didn't quite know how to fill out the story around it. This series is told in a non-linear fashion once again, which I do enjoy, but you have to be interested in the characters you're getting backstory on in order for these flashbacks to work. That's something I thought they did a very good job with in Hill House. This time out, I found some of the timeline jumping to be a bit confusing. I constantly found myself trying to decipher when the events I'm watching were supposed to be taking place. I never once felt that way during The Haunting of Hill House, and that had just as much non-linear storytelling. Going back to the characters for a second, I know anthology series typically reuse actors, but something didn't quite gel for me with the returning actors in Bly Manor. I think the reason for that is that the characters that these actors played were so much more well-written in Hill House, and that kind of solidifies them as those characters, at least in my mind. So when you bring them back as characters that aren't as well written, it's a little bit harder to connect with them because you've seen them in a much better role. This is most apparent with the Danny character, played by Victoria Pedretti, and the Peter Quint character, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen. Interestingly enough, those two actors played the two troubled twins in Hill House, and they were much more memorable in that because you felt like you knew them, and you actually gave a shit about them when they went through these horrible moments in their lives. The Danny and Peter characters in Bly Manor are much more one-dimensional than their Hill House counterparts. Danny plays the American foreigner who was hired by a wealthy family to basically take care of and teach their children, all while being in a haunted house. They try to give her some depth by having this traumatic backstory, but to me that backstory kind of goes nowhere, and it's really just there to set up her eventual relationship with the gardener. And in my personal opinion, these two characters didn't have much in the way of chemistry either, so that didn't help. And then you have the Peter character, who is a former assistant of the Wingrave family, and he had a secret affair with Danny's predecessor, Rebecca. Long story short, they both end up dying, so there's this whole subplot where they're trying to take over the children's bodies so they can have a life together, but when Rebecca refuses to go through with it, it's all kind of just dropped. Peter pretty much gives up his plan, and it makes their whole story pretty much unnecessary and pointless to me. And when I talk about filler, I'm mainly talking about the love story between Peter and Rebecca, because it all just seems to go nowhere and it feels like a waste of time by the end of it. These characters weren't all that interesting to me, and they also lack chemistry, so it made it very difficult for me to get invested in them. For me, it's very clear that this story was supposed to be about the two parallels between the two love stories, and how love corrupted and destroyed one of the couples, and it basically strengthened and unified the other, being Danny and the gardener. That's all good and everything, but it doesn't mean a whole lot when these characters eat up so much of the runtime and the story just kind of goes nowhere. They shied away from the more horrific elements, which seems strange for a show called The Haunting of Bly Manor. The Lady in the Lake is the highlight of Bly Manor in my personal opinion, and they do a good job of slowly revealing her intentions throughout the series. I think the issue is that she's kind of an afterthought and more in the background rather than being the main villain of the story. She's just kind of there, at least until the last two episodes, which I feel like are the best two episodes. The second to last episode is basically a Lady in the Lake origin story, and it's no coincidence that I found that story to be the most interesting part of this whole series. It made me wish they told that story in a more drawn-out manner, perhaps telling that story through the flashbacks throughout the course of the series, instead of focusing those flashbacks on the pointless Peter and Rebecca romance. To see how the Lady in the Lake goes from being the heiress to the original owner of Bly Manor, to becoming dreadfully sick and suffering for years, to losing the affections of her husband, to being murdered by her own sister, to being trapped in limbo inside of a chest full of her own valuables, to being let free after her sister tries to take those valuables, after which she strangles said sister and then she's forced to wander back and forth as a ghost from the lake to the house, slowly forgetting her purpose and who she is. It's a tragedy, really, and it's kind of remarkable that they were able to tell that story through the course of one episode and do it so efficiently. I should also point out too that episode leads directly into the finale in present day, where Dani basically sacrifices her body to the Lady in the Lake in order to save Flora. So that leads to the final episode basically being this waiting game of suspense, as it's made clear that the Lady in the Lake is at some point going to take over Dani's body. Honestly, this was the most interesting that Dani had been the whole time. I actually cared about her finally, as they portrayed her as someone who's kind of living on borrowed time. Again, it's kind of tragic because she should finally be happy, but she's constantly still living in fear. And it's kind of a gut punch when she sees no other option than to kill herself in the same lake that the Lady in the Lake resides in. I feel like the story that they told in the final 2 episodes was all we really needed to see. We honestly didn't need to waste time on these other uninteresting characters. The focus of the show should have been on the parallel between Dani, who experienced a tragedy and now has to deal with a haunted house on top of it, but the flip side of that coin should have focused purely on Viola the heiress and all the tragedies and heartbreak she experienced before she died and how the house came to be haunted. To me, that's your story right there. All the other characters and side stories that go on in Bly Manor really could have been removed, and I honestly think the show would have been better off for it. They told the story of Bly Manor essentially in 2 episodes. Perhaps if they expanded on those ideas in those 2 episodes a little bit better, we would have had a series that rivaled the original. Instead, in my personal opinion, we got a bit of a misstep, with an ambitious creator like Mike Flanagan basically trying too hard to make this different. As a result, The Haunting of Bly Manor lacks some of the mystique that we got with Hill House. I hope in future Haunting seasons, they find that balance again of horrific elements along with the dramatic storytelling that made the first series so great. So obviously, I didn't enjoy Bly Manor as much as I enjoyed Hill House, but let me know what you guys thought about it in the comments down below. I'd love to have a discussion with you. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.